On behalf of the Order of Malta, I'm very happy and proud to open this outstanding webinar on best practices in human trafficking prevention, healing, collaboration, and programs for men and boys. We must not forget that victims of human trafficking often face multiple forms of abuse, exploitation, and trauma. It is crucial to establish a comprehensive framework for the prevention of human trafficking and rehabilitation of survivors. 23 years after the Palermo Protocol, the scourge of human trafficking is far from being defeated. First, let me thank Ena Lucia Mariaca Pacheco for her clear and moving presentations, the result of years-long research project. She has demonstrated a unique academic expertise and through her research has gained the trust of many survivors and respect of many experts. I had the honor to be in the jury of her dissertation on this very topic at Royal Roads University in Victoria, BC, Canada. She will now present best practices in human trafficking prevention, healing, collaboration, and programs, and I would like to thank her for bringing us three outstanding speakers. First, Perry Power, actor, speaker, and entrepreneur. Perry Power raises awareness of intrafamiliar abuse and inspires survivors to break their silence. He is speaking from London. Second, Nathan Earl, researcher, advocate, and public health consultant with a passion of co-building resilient communities immune to exploitation. He is speaking from Connecticut, USA. And Francesco Ceccon, Italian, head of the Global Boys Initiative at ECPAT International, speaking to us from Madrid in Spain. Ena Lucia Mariaca Pacheco is going to tell you more about the work of our three speakers. And please, you have to know that her dissertation is available online in the webinar handout. Allow me to briefly quote from our four speakers. First, Ena Lucia Mariaca Pacheco, I quote, "Far too long, society has perpetuated the notion that vulnerability is weakness reserved for one gender alone. We must challenge this misconception and recognize the immense courage that it takes for male survivors to confront and share their experiences. By shining a light on these stories, we hope to ignite a profound shift in the way that we perceive and support male survivors." End of quote. Second, quote by Perry Power. "Breaking silence is so important for self-healing. The main thing is essentially owning our story. Because if we don't own it, we can't change our story that we've lived, right? We must own our story. Because if we don't own our story, then our story will own us. Be powerful." End of quote. Nathan Earl, the U.S. Council on Violence Against Men and Boys, is a dynamic public health initiative founded by men with lived experience, dedicated to preventing and responding to violence against men and boys in the US and worldwide. These individuals will collaborate to co-create knowledge and develop transformative strategies to address this pressing issue. End of quote. And fourth, Francesco Ceccon. So, the Global Boys Initiative is an initiative launched by ECPAT International a couple of years ago to shed light on this issue, but also to make sure that we understand the different manifestations of sexual violence against boys and look into solutions. What we saw from research and practice was that when working with boys, When working with communities on ideas of masculinity, gender norms, gender roles, and relations, we can actually transform them and we can make sure that all children are protected from any form of sexual violence. End of quote. Thank you to all. And now, without further ado, let me give the floor to Ena. Ena, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Michel. It is such a pleasure to be here yet again for our fourth session, focusing on research on violence against men and boys. And I'm so happy to present Francesco, Nathan, and Perry. If you would all like to say a quick hello to our audience before we get started.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, everyone. Hello.
So without further ado, we can play the video. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and participants, welcome to this webinar on best practices in human trafficking prevention, healing, collaboration, and programs for men and boys. The fourth in our series. I would like to extend a deep gratitude to Michel and the organizing team, as well as the Order of Malta for hosting. My name is Ena Lucia Mariaca Pacheco, and today I'm honored to represent the U.S. Council on Violence Against Men and Boys as their global ambassador, helping bring together key individuals from around the world to address these very important topics and hopefully lead to transformative change. And it is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished panel of experts who will be sharing their invaluable insights and experience in this critical field. Today with us is Perry Power, an actor, speaker, and entrepreneur who raises awareness about intrafamiliar abuse. Perry's commitment in demonstrating through his involvement with organizations such as We Rescue Kids and We Together, providing mental health and self-reporting tools to survivors of abuse. Next, we will hear from Nathan Earle, a researcher, advocate, and public health consultant with over 2 decades of experience in preventing violence against boys, men, and LGBTQ+ youth. His dedication is evident through his roles with organizations like the National Youth Law Center, the National Center of Child Trafficking, and as a founding member of the U.S. Council on Violence Against Men and Boys. He will also extend an invitation to participants in the first Violence Against Men and Boys conference, which will be hosted next year. So please keep a reminder on your calendar. Finally, we are privileged to have Francesco Secon, head of the Global Boys Initiative at ECPAT International. With a rich background in child protection and experiences across West Africa, Europe, and Central America, Francesco brings a wealth of knowledge in addressing child survivors of sexual violence, exploitation, and trafficking. Together, our panelists will shed light on new approaches, collaborations, and research that is crucial in our collaborative efforts to combat human trafficking and support survivors, especially men and boys. Their expertise will undoubtedly contribute to our understanding and advance in the vital field. Thank you for joining us today, so let's embark on this enlightenment journey together.
Hey everyone, Perry Power here. I'm an actor, I'm a storyteller, I'm an entrepreneur, and I am a charity co-founder. Now, when it comes to my story, it kind of starts when I was 4 years old. My mother, who I love to death, we're great friends now, she's hilarious. That's where I get my personality from. But back when I was 4 years old, she had to do something for herself, and she had to leave, you know? And she left, and it was just me and my dad, and I'd only see her once or twice a year for a few years. But it was just me and my dad, and he raised me. My stepmom came into the picture a few years later after this, but it was just me and him, and it was a tough time. You know, it really was growing up with a man. My dad was a Cockney geezer. He's from East London, right? And, you know, he's an odd man, right? You're masculine of men. And I couldn't mess up around him because he'd make me know about it, you know, and it was difficult, very difficult to be raised in that environment. because I used him as kind of like an example of what being a man should be, which, as we discover in my story, there's a lot of twists and turns when it comes to that. Now, when I was 10 years old, I was sexually abused by my step-granddad. Now, this happened for over a year. Truth is, I don't actually know how long it went on for. I don't remember when it started. And I know this is very common for survivors within a family environment, especially if they've been abused by a family member for God knows how long, or a babysitter that they've known for many, many years. They tend to don't know when it started. Not all the time, but a lot of times they don't know when it started. I'm one of them. I have no idea when it started because I didn't know it was wrong, right? The whole time he groomed me. He was my hero growing up. He was my hero. So I have no idea when it started, but I do remember when it ended because he would abuse me a lot of times when there was someone else in the room. And my stepmom caught it happening one time and she put a stop to it. She took me out, she took me home, she told my dad, and my dad then confronted me in quite a confrontational way. And he asked me what happened, and he told me that it was wrong, and he told me that I'm never going to go around there again. And I'm also not allowed to speak about it. I'm not allowed to go to school and tell my friends. I'm not allowed to tell my mum. I need to keep this at home between the four walls of the house, right? Right there, that's where the trauma started, because that's where the silence started. Okay, it lasted for about 12 years living in silence. But I grew up now becoming a teenager, becoming a man in today's society as the son of my father. And when I was 19, I left home. I just needed to escape the hold that my dad had over me. So I go traveling. I went to Australia and I become a party guy. I'm wearing masks to essentially hide the boy that was abused. Now, when I was 22 years old, so this was quite a considerable amount of time after I come back. I'd moved in with my girlfriend at the time. And my dad, his drinking got a lot worse. He always had a drinking problem. I would grow up filling the vodka bottles with water and put it back in the cupboard so my mum wouldn't notice any difference, right? That was happening a lot. But his drinking got worse and worse and worse. And when I moved in with my girlfriend, he came round one time, pissed as a fart. And he just told me that he had an argument with my stepmom, which was common then. And he left, and I would have asked this to his face, but I sent him a text. And I said, Dad, why are you drinking so much? And he comes back and all he says was to fight away the demons. That was it. No idea what he meant by that, right? No idea. Now later on that day, he then sends me a text and he says that he's got a pain in his stomach, and I didn't respond back to it. And then sometime later I did, but he didn't respond back to me. Then I get two pictures in the evening from my brother, one of an ambulance van, one of my dad lying on a bed at the house with the paramedic standing next to him. Now, by that point, we're talking June 2017. January 2017, he just become a diabetic. Now, prior to that, he had high blood pressure. So he was on high blood pressure tablets and then becomes a diabetic. Then June 2017, he's got a pain, and paramedics basically said that his blood levels were off. So they need to take him down to the hospital to even him out. So they're putting him back in the van, drive down to the hospital. But unfortunately, he didn't make it to the hospital, and he had a heart attack, and he passed away. And he was 48 years old. Now, what ended up happening was after this, about 6 or so-ish months later, I ended up seeing a video on YouTube of Lewis Howes being interviewed by Ellen DeGeneres. And she asked him why he had written this book called The Mask of Masculinity. And he said because he was abused as a kid and he grew up wearing masks. And the way that he said that, he used words that made me realize exactly what I had been doing. Right? He put it into context for me. And I made a decision in that moment, all right, now that I'm aware of this problem, what can I do right now to make a change? And that for me was, oh shit, I need to tell my girlfriend. I need to tell Abby when she comes home. Shitting bricks, right? But and I wait for her to come home. We go out for a walk with my dog. And I tell her about being abused. Now, I don't even remember a single word that I said, but I remember how I felt, which is feeling like I was just stark bollock naked and, in the middle of central London or in the middle of Times Square, and everyone's just staring at me, right? But that's vulnerability, as Brene Brown says. And, but I don't remember a single word that I said. But then what ended up happening was from then, a few months later, I go to a business mastermind event, and it was me and 6 or 7 other fitness trainers. And because at the time I had a fitness business, and they go around the room to just like introduce yourself, tell us why you're here, what your fitness business is about, and what you're hoping to achieve. Comes around to me, I'm lost. I don't think I talked anything about the business, or maybe I did, but what I primarily spoke about was being abused. But again, I don't remember what I said, but I remember how it felt. And it's just, it's just crazy. And then what ended up happening was driving home from that event. I was like, right, I feel more, my comfort zone has been expanded, and I'm feeling more like I want to, I just want to get this off my chest, but I don't want to tell every Tom, Dick, and Harry. I want to say it once and it's just out there. Now, I was, like I am now, working on social media pretty much all the time. So in my head, I was like, right, I'm going to do a video. I'm just going to put it on Facebook. In my head, I'm like, okay, cool. You're going to do that when you get home. Get home and do it. Another voice. I don't think you will, mate. I don't think you will. Because you're going to get home. Abby's going to ask you how the event was. You're going to update her, and then boom, you're back in your comfort zone. Then you'll tell yourself a reason as to why you shouldn't speak out again. So I pulled my car over, and what you see right here is a screenshot from the video. And it was me on a global scale breaking my silence. Now, what ended up happening from that video is I ended up going around to back home to my stepmom's house, and she told me that she'd watched the video, and she said that I didn't know that you was abusing more than that one time. Right? When I caught it happening, I thought that was just it. And that made me realize that even in those moments, I didn't tell them that my step-granddad had done more to me than that very instant. And then I go around to my auntie's house, my dad's sister, and she then tells me that I wasn't the only one in the family who had been abused by my step-granddad. There was 3 others too, and my dad was one of them. And that right there made me realize that my dad had lived and died in silence. That's why he made me be quiet. That's why he hit the bottle. That is why he had a heart attack at the age of 48. Because of the silence that he was drowning in. Because of the demons that he was struggling to fight. And, that right there essentially made me, gave me purpose to be like, you know what? I'm going to go out there and I'm going to help survivors speak out. I'm going to go out there and help men not go down the same road that my dad went down. So I start that mission, and I start that sort of journey of purpose. And cutting the story short, I ended up moving into a house on my own. I cut ties with the fitness business because I grew misaligned to it, because it had nothing to do with my story. And I'm literally sleeping on the floor in the house with my dog, just me and her, sharing halving my dinners with her. Debt collectors at the door, everything. It really was the darkest year of my life. And what, like here, I end up, hey, life of luxury. I end up upgrading from the floor to a sofa bed. I managed to get the sofa bed for I think 70 quid from a charity shop. And then I slept on there. And as you can tell, they've got a Christmas tree in the corner. I use a fruit box as a table. But, I had a roof over my head and I had a Mara. And at the time, that was all that mattered, But this is a screenshot from a video that I took. Basically saying that I was this close from ending it. And it's a tough one because I feel like some of the, the universe, faith in who I can become, knowing that it's just challenges of life is thrown my way, and also knowing that if I was going to drive my car into a wall and end it all, who's going to look after tomorrow? So it's an accumulation of a lot of things why I didn't go through with it. But, what ended up happening was on Netflix, I ended up watching a documentary, Jeffrey Epstein, and I was 2 or 3 episodes into it, and I ended up getting the idea of writing a book, right? Because she's talking about living in silence and she can't speak out because of this powerful guy. And that gave me the idea, is like, what I need to do right now is I just need to write my story. That's it. I don't know where it's going to take me, but I just feel like, the universe is telling me right now that this is what I need to do. So I then crack on with that. I actually wrote it in 30 days, but didn't publish it. I kept it in my Google Drive, right? I was like, right, that's it. And then Amara, my dog, her health just rapidly declined. And, I've been through abuse. I've been through breakups. I've been through, my dad. But this, if you're a dog parent and you're watching this, woo, you're going to know what I'm, how I'm feeling right now, and especially back then. But it's the darkest day of my entire life, letting her go, and 4.5 years old. But yeah, and what I ended up having to do was I ended up leaving the house, that one, because I couldn't stay any longer. I went back to the house, and I woke up the next day in a dog bed. I was like, right, if I stay here for 24 more hours, I won't be alive in 24 more hours. So I ended up leaving. Ended up sleeping on my auntie's couch for 4 months, and ended up moving into for the first time ever shared a house with like roommates. And I just woke up one day and I just had this moment. My life is full of fuck it moments, right? Because it helps me just, but you know what? Fuck it, do it. Why not? What am I waiting for? Not tomorrow, now, right now, today. And I woke up like, Perry, get this book out. Because the fears that you have right now getting a book out was the same fears that you had a year ago. Because this is now a year ahead of me writing the book. And if you wait for 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 years, it's going to be the same fears again. So you're just going to go onto Canva, create a book cover, use Grammarly, Google extension to sort out the wordings, just watch a few YouTube videos to publish it, self-publish it through Amazon KDP, and that's it. Right? And then boom, I end up publishing it, and I end up getting into the media, and it was just a snowball from there. Like that book, launching that book has got me to where I am today. I get into First Voice over here. This is my article in the First Voice magazine. Getting into a news article here, into the Sun, front cover of the Surrey Advertiser. I did a TEDx talk, front cover of Surrey Live. Lots of amazing things happen. And then this one, very interesting, with Spotlight. It's a film. If you haven't seen it, all of you should have seen it. But I'm going to assume most of you have seen it. And at the end of the movie, they do a lot of listings around the world of reportings of child molestation. Anyway, I end up finding out from going out into the press that my step-granddad's family reached out to me, ended up meeting up with them, found out that he abused them all too. And my step-granddad he's raised in Ireland, and you probably know where this is going, went to a something called St. Joseph's Industrial Estate. It's a school, boarding school, for kids. Like both his parents died, and that's why he went in there with his brother. And anyway, getting abused and raped and everything you can possibly imagine by the priests there. And that was very an interesting thing that I found out. And what ended up happening was I decided to just go to town and go all in on using my platform, using my message to reach survivors out there, and just to sort of get my message out there. And my audience has blown up to 149,000 on TikTok, over 200,000 on Facebook, over 60,000 on Instagram. And the engagement and people respond. I don't talk about comedies. I don't do sketches. I don't do dances. I talk about stories. I talk about abuse. I don't just talk about abuse, but a lot of what I do is talk about abuse, and I share other stories of abuse. But it's mainly from the angle of thriving. It's about achieving. It's about creating a life that you want to live. It's about not living a life under a label that has kind of been slapped onto you. And that's pretty much what I do. I've got a Facebook group called the Power Tribe, which is got over 4,700 survivors in there. Sharing their stories is a real safe space for people to just not feel alone anymore, really. That's what that is. And we can see here, one of the main things is about everyone is on social media, especially you boys growing up, teenagers, young men, older men. They're all on social media. They're consuming content, especially videos. And that gave me the idea of, okay, let me put stories that they could relate to with an inspiring, powerful message at the end wrapped up into it to make them not feel alone, to make them feel inspired, and to show them a path of what they can go down that is different from the path that they're currently on, because that's not the only way. They're not alone. They're not the only one that was raped by their uncle. They're not the only one that was abused by their grandma, right? There's plenty of others too. And as you can tell by the views on these videos, it's resonating with a lot of people. I then launched a charity with a friend of mine, Juliet, who grew up in the foster care system in America, and she was actually raised in a satanic cult as a foster care house. And we launched a charity called We Rescue Kids, which is essentially we get donations in, we pay for child licensed therapists to put child survivors through a mental health care program. It's essentially what we do. We match them both up. And then we have, I'm on the board of We Together, which is a UK-based charity where essentially what we're doing is we're building out a platform that allows survivors and victims to anonymously self-report what they went through and what happened to them. And it goes into this platform, into this database, and then using AI technology, if there's similarities in people's stories, which there will be a lot of times, creates a cluster which then gets sent to the police to then start an investigation, because no longer is it one voice, but it's the voice of many. It's a long phase, but this is my North Star. This is my dream, which is powerful pictures. And, I'm an actor and have been since I was a kid. And, I believe I'm here to tell stories through video reels, stories in Hollywood, stories in the British film industry, in Bollywood, everything that inspires people and, creates change. And my thing is powerful pictures. I'm known for telling true story films. So, that's the goal. And that's what I'm in the beginning stages of building there. And then we've also got, which has taken up a lot of my focus at the moment, which I'm so grateful for, which is powerful books. And essentially with powerful books, what we do is we work with trauma survivors to help them turn their story into a book. And that process right there acts almost as if it's its own therapy. It's basically a self-healing, very therapeutic, very transformative journey, which brings the survivors that we work with a lot of healing. And then at the end, if they wish to, they can publish their book to the world. But if they don't want to, they don't have to do that. Nobody needs to know about it. Their abuser doesn't need to know about it. Their family don't need to know about it. It can just be for them. All right. Now we do this through a very specific structure called the Powerful Story Framework. And essentially what we do is we forget about the book that they want to write. We first unravel the story that they've lived so far. We see where the dots connect, and then we find their authentic voice. Then next, we figure out what their message is. What's the message that's been born out of their story, right? What's the message that's gotten into where they are today? How can we communicate that in a clear and concise way? And then we figure out what the structure is for the book. So how's the book going to come across? Is it an autobiography? Is it a guide? Is it a blend? Is it a research study? What is it? How's it going to come across? What's it going to deliver? And then what's all the chapters to the book? So then when they start writing, because a lot of times when someone just want to write a story, they start writing, then boom, they hit a brick wall. Where do I go from here? Do I talk about this experience? Do I talk about that experience? Do I include names or not include names? I don't want this to be a sub story. My book is too long my story is too long for one book. It needs to be 5 books. My story is too short for a book. It's going to be 30 pages. It's a pamphlet, And essentially what this does is it just, boom, just wipes all of that. Just gets rid of all those questions, okay? Because we can't get answers to those questions before we start writing. It just essentially creates resistance and overwhelm. Now I'm very aware the next couple of slides is going to be of women. I'm very aware of that. But I'm going to share something in a second about the men. But, if a woman can transform, a man can too. This is Deborah. She turned her story into a book, completely inspiring, completely transformational. We've got Emma, who basically been wanting to write a book for an entire life, and she just didn't follow through with it. But she did, and she joined the community. She's actually now our book editor, and she's our client success manager, so she supports people's journeys. So our team, we're run by survivors for survivors, right? And we've also got, that should not say Emma. That should say Ali. So let's forget about the Emma, right? It is Ali. Ali's amazing. She's just, she wrote her book, and she was abused by her father. And she now actually has signed her first 2 book events in local bookstores, which she has towards the end of the year, which is amazing. And then we have also, God, I've done it again. It's not Emma, it's Bonnie. Forgive me for these little details. This is why I have people that help me, right? For the small details. I'm a big vision man. I struggle with small details. Anyway, not Emma, it's Bonnie. Now, Bonnie is an amazing woman. Again, she was abused by her father. And she said that writing her book has brought her more healing than 10 years worth of counseling. 10 years. And this happens to a lot of people. A lot of people come into a program, have had therapy, they've had counseling. And whilst it's not a competition, a lot of times, they have therapy that really, really nicely gels with the writing. But for some people, just for whatever reason, the therapy or the counseling didn't help them, but writing their story brought them more transformation than they could have ever possibly imagined. And then, so we currently got, at the time of recording this, we've got 38 survivors in our program. 4 of them are men, right? So you best believe I'm working hard to try and increase that number. We've got Scott there, we've got John there, we've got Glenn, and we have Rob that's joined. We've got 4 at the moment, but again, even these 2 men here, lovely, inspiring men, are also saying about how much their lives are transforming in the process of writing their story. And that's essentially what we're building here, and that's what we're doing, So what I'd like to say is that the journey that I've been on, it's kind of brought me to a point where I'm like, no matter what stage you're at in life, there's always a meaning to it, which is why if you've got a story, you can turn it into a book. doesn't matter about where you've come from, right? But it's about owning the narrative of your story now to create the life that you want to live moving forward. Okay. Now, for me, I've taken away two big meanings so far. The first one is about breaking the silence. You have to break the silence to start that healing journey. But here's like one of my messages that I put out there into the world is, if you're living in silence, it's to not tell your partner, tell a parent, tell a therapist as the first time you break the silence, telling someone else, because you can't control their reaction. So if they reject you, if they pause for too long, if they say something that you didn't want to hear, that could send you back to living in silence for the rest of your life, because now you associate your truth with rejection. Okay. So instead, I say to people, break the silence to yourself first, as many different ways as possible, and then others. Tell someone else in step number 17, because now you're telling somebody from a place of power. You're not seeking validation from them, right? You're not seeking approval from them. You're telling them because it is, right? And breaking the silence to yourself can be writing a poem, could be writing a song, choreographing a dance piece. It could be, going to clay molding and making a cup, because now you have a physical representation of your story. It could be writing a book, telling yourself in the mirror, just telling yourself so many times until you feel like you're owning that truth, And then the next thing is essentially owning our story. Because if we don't own it, we can't change our story that we've lived, right? We must own our story, because if we don't own our story, then our story will own us. Be powerful.
The U.S. Council on Violence Against Men and Boys is a dynamic public health initiative founded by men with lived experience dedicated to preventing and responding to violence against men and boys in the United States and worldwide. Today, we are a diverse collective of cross-sector stakeholders across the gender spectrum, driven by a shared commitment to change. We envision a future where the experiences and voices of men and boys are acknowledged and integrated into the broader movement for equity, justice, and well-being. Our mission is to collaborate with and strengthen public health stakeholders, fostering a collective approach to preventing violence against males. We will achieve this through the implementation of 5 core activities that include research, conducting and supporting research to better understand the dynamics, causes, and consequences of violence against men and boys; convening, bringing together diverse voices and perspectives to foster collaboration and innovative solutions; public mobilization, mobilizing communities and individuals to raise awareness, challenge norms, and stand against violence; advocacy, advocating for policies and practices that promote gender equity, justice, and violence prevention; and co-creating transformative learning, empowering those with lived experience and other stakeholders to lead, learn, and drive change. Our long-term outcome is an equitable and just world where every person, regardless of gender, can live free from exploitation and trauma. Together, we are committed to creating a brighter future for all. To effectively structure collaborations between community organizations, healthcare providers, and social services to prevent human trafficking and promote healing for males, the following key steps are essential. First, leadership and lived experience. Ensure that males with lived experience take on leadership roles and consistently involve impacted community members' voices in the decision-making processes. Secondly, prevention focus. Emphasize prevention by addressing social determinants of health, adverse child experiences, and negative community environments before victimization occurs. Third, healing and support. Collaborate with trauma-informed long-term medical and behavioral health providers, along with community organizations offering housing, mentoring, economic empowerment, advocacy, cultural affirmation, and education for comprehensive healing. Fourth, data-driven approaches. Invest in equitable research, including innovative methods like community-based participatory research, to better understand the experiences of marginalized males and their communities. By incorporating these principles, collaborations can be structured to effectively prevent trafficking and promote healing for males while prioritizing leadership, prevention, and data-driven decision-making. 4 steps governments can take to ensure that their policies and legislation related to human trafficking prevention and support services are inclusive and accessible to male survivors are: first, gender-neutral language. Ensure that policies and legislation use gender-neutral language to encompass all potential survivors, regardless of gender identity. Avoid reinforcing stereotypes that trafficking only affects women and girls. Secondly, explicit inclusion. Explicitly state that support services are available to all survivors regardless of gender. This sends a clear message that male survivors are recognized and valued. Third, awareness campaigns. Launch awareness campaigns to educate the public, law enforcement, and service providers about the existence and unique needs of male survivors. These campaigns can help reduce stigma and improve understanding. Fourth, training and sensitization. Provide training to law enforcement officers, healthcare providers, social workers, and other professionals to recognize and respond to male survivors' specific needs. This includes training on trauma-informed care and cultural sensitivity. The healthcare field can play a critical role in preventing and responding to the unique needs of males who have been impacted by human trafficking. 3 examples include inclusive response protocols. Healthcare can significantly contribute to addressing the unique needs of male trafficking survivors by implementing comprehensive response protocols. These protocols should encompass specialized training in recognizing and assisting male victims, utilizing gender-inclusive and validated screening and diagnostic tools, and establishing culturally responsive linkages and referrals. This ensures that healthcare providers are equipped to support all survivors effectively. Number 2, enhance public health surveillance. The healthcare sector plays a pivotal role in preventing and responding to male trafficking survivors' needs by strengthening public health surveillance systems. This entails collecting and analyzing data on adverse child experiences, social determinants of health, and associated comorbidities. Such data can encompass conditions like HIV and AIDS, substance abuse, mental health challenges, housing instability, incarceration, and prior victimization experiences. Utilizing this data is crucial for informed decision-making and tailored interventions. And finally, the utilization of robust electronic medical records. Healthcare professionals can enhance their support for male trafficking survivors by implementing robust electronic medical record systems. These systems can provide trauma-informed clinical decision support, enabling healthcare providers to deliver more sensitive and effective care. This integration of trauma-informed approaches into the electronic medical record system promotes better understanding and consideration of survivors' traumatic experiences, leading to improved clinical outcomes. The International Conference on Violence Against Men and Boys, also known as VAM24, is a public health intervention to prevent and respond to various forms of violence and associated trauma impacting males around the world. The conference is scheduled from June 11th to June 13th, 2024, and is taking place both in person at the Hyatt Regency downtown Miami and virtually. Registration for this event is now open, and there's a limited number of discounted passes available for both virtual and in-person attendees. So mark your calendars and secure your spot. But what's the purpose of this conference, you might ask? Well, it's more than just your traditional gathering. VAM24 aims to bring together thought-leading change agents from across the globe. These individuals will collaborate to co-create knowledge and develop transformative strategies to address this pressing issue. The conference objectives are: build a community of practice, raise awareness, reframe violence as a health issue, enhance prevention strategies, strengthen response and support, catalyze strategic funding, and empower engagement. The types of violence and injury that will be addressed include human trafficking, domestic, intimate partner and teen dating violence, child abuse, sexual violence, community and firearm violence, overdose, suicide, and other self-harm. Conference programming will include workshops on cultural humility and intersectionality, hospital-based violence intervention programs, mental health challenges and treatment, substance abuse, dependency, and overdose, HIV and AIDS, chronic and acute health outcomes of violence, innovative funding streams, case studies, lived experience consultant presentations, collective impact, and more. Interactive sessions such as action planning, fireside chats, research roundtables, and World Cafe-style activities modeled after the World Cafe Community Foundation. So get ready to join the 2024 International Conference on Violence Against Men and Boys, a platform for transformative change in public health. Save the date, register now, and be a part of this global effort to make our world a safer and healthy place for all.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to introduce the Global Voice Initiative. I'm Francesco Ceccon, and I'm the head of the Global Voice Initiative at ECPAT International. I'm very glad to be here with you today and to quickly introduce the work we're doing at ECPAT to make sure that all boys are protected from any form of sexual abuse and sexual exploitation. So the Global Voice Initiative is an initiative launched by ECPAT International a couple of years ago to shed light on the issue, but also to make sure that we understand the different manifestations of sexual violence against boys and look into solutions. So the Global Voice Initiative started as a research project that wanted to really understand and collect data and evidence on how boys are affected by sexual abuse and exploitation, to then transform into something even more practical and forward-looking. The research was important because the research allowed us to gather all the information and evidence that was available at the global level, but also to really delve deeper into understanding how boys are affected by sexual abuse and exploitation in 10 different countries of the world in 5 different regions. The research was groundbreaking because, in spite of being conducted in different contexts, it allowed us to gather common learnings. So we understood that this was really a global issue that required global attention. So boys, in spite of cultural, economic, and societal different dynamics, boys do face the same issues when it comes to seek out help and disclose because of gender norms and ideas of masculinity, but also because service providers are not always necessarily equipped to be able to work with boys. They are not always necessarily equipped to understand how boys are affected by sexual abuse and exploitation. And the gender bias we have affects the way we construct services, we construct child protection systems. So this creates a vicious circle in which boys, even when they're able to seek out help, they might encounter resistance from families, communities, but also those who are in charge of their protection, so such as child protection services, but also other support and care services. The research was also important because it allowed us to consult directly boy survivors themselves and understand what were their experiences and what they would have liked to have as an ideal service when they experienced, unfortunately, sexual abuse and exploitation in their own context. And it was interesting because boys had a very clear idea and picture of what an ideal service looks like. So boys shared with us the importance of active listening, the importance of deconstructing masculinity when looking for help, and the importance of being believed first and foremost. We continued to consult with survivors during different exchanges we had with other global organizations, but also during the documentation of case studies that we conducted with both our ECPAT members, but also with external partners. So following the research we conducted at the Global Voice Initiative, we really wanted to focus on practice. So we understood what the issues were. We understood what the manifestations of sexual exploitation and abuse were, and what were the unique and specific challenges that boys face when accessing protection services. But what we missed was, how do we then work with boys? What are the practices and approaches that seem to work, based also on what the boys themselves shared with us? So at ECPAT, we conduct a series of case studies in 8 countries for now, and we intend to continue conducting more case studies to be able to understand how services had to adjust the way they work with children specifically, and develop specific expertise to address the specific trajectories of boys. So how services had to deconstruct ideas of masculinity, how services had to change the way they talked and communicate to be able to work with boy survivors and provide a service that was accepted by boys and was relevant and just for boys. And it was interesting because there is a lot of expertise on the issue. The problem is that this expertise is somewhat scattered around the globe and not necessarily documented and not known by other organizations. So what we're trying to do now is making sure that we translate all this amazing expertise and all this amazing learning that many of civil society organizations developed around the world into knowledge that can be used for more service providers. So how do we translate this learning into practice? The idea that we have an ECPAT and we want to do this in a collaborative way with more stakeholders is to make sure that we capture all this learning and we make sure it's translated into capacity strengthening actions, programmatic tools, training materials, guidelines, and principles that more and more child protection actors, service providers, and any interest stakeholders really can use to adjust their services. So some of the interesting practices we gathered were really around the question of deconstructing masculinity, creating a safe space for boys, and making sure that boys were feeling at ease when sharing and comfortable and felt that they were listened to. So when it comes down to promising practices that we notice, everything really is related to the capacity of frontline workers to be able to create a safe space for boys, a comfort space for boys, when there is no judgment, no discrimination, no stigma, and there is active listening. These all seem very easy to look on paper, but it becomes more difficult to do on practice. And it really comes down also to matter of soft skills of each and individual frontline worker and service provider. So as you can imagine, it is quite hard to translate these soft skills that someone might have into standards, guidelines, principles, and capacity building tools and trainings. But this is the challenge we have, and this is the challenge that we're ready to also face and to achieve it. It is important that moving forward, we try to focus on solution. And I also want to use this opportunity to discuss with you if you have experience and learning on what seem to be promising and interesting practices to work with boys. So far, what we were able to identify is that frontline workers, when working with boys, really need to make an effort to challenge their own gender biases and to actively listen to boys. Challenging their own gender biases mean that those norms, those gender norms, and those ideas of masculinities that look at boys as stoic, as strong, and manly, as barriers that prevent them from seeking out help. And those biases are not only integrated in the way of functioning of boys, but also in the way that we function, in the way as service providers we function. And sometimes those can be reflected in the way we communicate and work with boys. So service providers understood that they needed to do a lot of work on themselves first to be able to deconstruct those gender norms and those ideas of masculinity, to then be able to not reflect them on boys when communicating with boys, when trying to support boys. And this comes down really to being able to create a safe space in this sense. So some of the key tips that service providers shared with us in terms of practice were really constructed around this, were really constructed around communicating in a language that is not judgmental, that is safe, that is not stigmatizing, and confidential. So service providers really notice the importance of making sure that when discussing with boys, confidentiality is stressed, but also that there is a non-judgmental space that boys can share and feel safe in sharing whatever they feel about their expertise, but without necessarily looking for too much information. One thing that was really interesting to me when listening to service providers was that they shared that in working with boys, reaching a point of disclosure is not necessarily the ultimate goal. What we want to be able to work with boys is how to provide protection, support, and emotional recovery, but without necessarily having all the details about what happened or without putting boys in a situation where they need to be re-victimized. So these are just some of the few tips that they shared, but there is more, and I encourage you to share and read the case studies that we developed that are available on our website to understand more. But let's say that we use this practice as well and this learning to convene the first ECPAT Global Boys Summit, which happened in June 2023 in Casablanca, in Morocco. and was organized with our member in Morocco, Aman. We organized the Global Boys Summit in the format of a workshop in which we wanted to retake these tips, approaches, and learnings that I just shared quickly with you, delve deeper into this, and identify together what solutions do we have, what needs to be scaled up, what needs to be learned, and what needs to be developed more. So the Global Boys Summit gathered 65 people from civil society organizations at the global, at international level, practitioners, experts, academia, global agencies, and donor communities to really delve deeper into these practices, delve deeper into the specific challenges that boys face when it comes to issues of sexual abuse and exploitation, but also into solutions. So the Global Boys Summit in June 2023 was incredibly groundbreaking because it was the first time ever that these people could come together, could discuss in a safe space what were the challenges they were facing, but also identify together what is it that needed to be done, what is it that we need as a global community moving forward. As you all know, when we work on questions of sexual violence against men and boys, it can get quite lonely. So it is difficult to identify allies across countries, like-minded organizations. So it was really interesting and really motivating to see all these people come together for the first time and see that we were not alone, that we could join forces. And actually, joining forces is the only way forward if we want to start working on solutions, if we want to make sure that more resources, more funding, more attention is dedicated to boys at the global level, and therefore start working on ways to develop solutions for boys. And it was also a self-care moment, I think, for everyone to see how supportive this was. And it was also an important moment to clarify how working on these issues is an opportunity to challenge harmful gender norms, to challenge harmful ideas of masculinity that do not only affect boys, but in turn also create violence in communities and contribute to issues of gender-based violence. The Global Boys Summit was an important moment to also for practitioners and academia and civil society to come together and think, are we communicating about this in the right way? There is sometimes a misunderstanding about what we're trying to do. And the Global Boys Summit was a moment to clarify, working on ensuring that all boys are protected against sexual abuse and exploitation is not only an obligation, again, under human rights and children's rights to make sure that all boys are protected, but it's also an opportunity to make sure that we can reduce levels of gender-based violence. What we saw from research and practice was that when working with boys, when working with communities on ideas of masculinity, gender norms, gender roles and relations, we can actually transform them and we can make sure that all children are protected from any form of sexual violence. So finally, to conclude, what I want to say as well is that after the Global Boys Summit, we have a clear roadmap on what needs to be done. I'm happy to share with you the outcome report of the Global Boys Summit, but also I'm happy to answer any questions or comments you may have on the way forward. But just to quickly share the main highlights. The Global Boys Summit really was a moment in which practitioners were able to say, we need to do this together, we need to join forces. And then this means that we need to clearly identify together what are the strategic opportunities, moments that exist at the global and regional level to influence change. What are the spaces that we need to influence? What are the opportunities? What are the actors? What are the decision makers that we need to involve to be able to change something about this? So these are all questions that we are going to answer together as a global community moving forward. And the decision of the Global Boys Summit was to do this identification process together, but also to build on the different resources and capacity of every supporting organizations to really maximize these opportunities that we will identify. And same goes for programming. So one thing that came out of the summit was that we know what ideal service provision looks like. Ideal service provision looks like a place where all service providers that are involved in the provision of protection to boys, meaning child protection staff, meaning law enforcement staff, meaning healthcare supporters, and so on, need to have the necessary skills to create a safe space with boys that is not judgmental, that is confidential, and that makes sure that boys can recover safely. So this means that we can translate all this knowledge that practitioners have into concrete training packages, tools, and principles for other child protection actors to be able to work with boys. And this is another outcome of the Global Boys Summit. And how we're going to achieve this, the idea is to do it again together. So we're really interested into looking into practice and experiences that are happening at the local level already that can be documented and be translated for tools at the global level and be replicated in more countries. So one of the outcomes of the Global Boys Summit is to identify more and more of these practices and putting them together into tools that can be useful for more practitioners. So it's a long-term process, as you can understand and can imagine, but it's the right way forward. We need to be able to create a safe space first, even before continuing to raise awareness, so that more boys can make sure that more boys can be sure that they can access safe spaces. The way we're going to do it is, again, is to collaborate and make sure that we have a compilation of all the practice available, of all the tools available, and try to create something at the global level that can be replicated. Moving forward, again, another big highlight of the Global Boys Summit is the need to campaign around the issue, to be more vocal about the issue, and to do so with the right language. Again, with a language that makes sure that this is understood as an issue that is relevant at the global level, that all countries are affected by this, but also that can be a powerful tool to contribute to the broader fight against gender-based violence. I'm going to stop here because I think I'm already over time, but I'm happy to answer any questions, comments during the session, but also following the session, and to engage more on this. Thank you so much for your attention and time.
Right now, we are losing our boys to violence, to gangs, to suicide. We need targeted interventions. We need research. We need data. We need to get all stakeholders involved on this topic.
In June 2023, the first ever ECPAT Global Boys Summit in Casablanca, Morocco, brought together 65 practitioners from over 30 countries, united to amplify support for boys at risk and survivors of sexual exploitation and abuse, paving the way for a safer future.
The Global Boys Summit is important because it brings together practitioners. That's something we've been missing for quite a while because that's where the bottleneck is situated. And we know that there's some pioneer organizations that have done brilliant work in learning, oftentimes by doing, but really engaging with children, with boys.
The summit created a space for like-minded individuals to connect on a personal level, expanding the global community committed to protecting and empowering boys. Workshops and group discussions ignited meaningful conversations on how to break down gender norms and ideas of masculinity, and how to build safe environments while working with boy survivors.
And this has been the first time that we've all been able to connect. And just as adolescent boy survivors need a community, we all need a community of support.
We need interventions where silence has to be broken within the boy child. And this can be done through a sense of psychosocial support. Interventions are needed for our boys and a sense of safe space for our boys.
At the World Cafe, practitioners took center stage to showcase their innovative practices, tools, and resources developed to meet the unique needs of boys from diverse contexts and communities. Uniting their collective experience and expertise, practitioners transformed these learnings into tangible solutions, developing action points to be implemented at the global level. The 2023 Global Boys Summit has kickstarted a worldwide movement to supercharge support for boy survivors and arm practitioners with the best tools for appropriate and quality care. Protection is everyone's responsibility. Let's end the sexual exploitation and abuse of boys.
As we saw today, it takes a community to make change, and collaboration only makes us stronger. And I wanted to show you a sneak peek into a future guest that we will have on this series, as well as a great example on how small actors can make a big difference and a big impact together. I would like to introduce Holly Wood and to see how organizations across Canada are changing the Canadian legal landscape for human trafficking awareness, action, and prevention.
Hi, I'm Holly. The video you are about to see is a visual representation of high-impact collaboration. As the Vice Chair of the Ottawa Coalition to End Human Trafficking, my team and I have the chance to sit at the table with parliamentary leaders and policymakers from across Canada once a month on Parliament Hill in the nation's capital. The Coalition Steering Committee is comprised of NGOs, service providers, survivors, law enforcement, healthcare specialists, and other key stakeholders who speak to the issues that we see in the trenches of our work every single day. Here, we are able to listen, learn, propose, and discuss solutions, and provide insight to policymakers on what is working and what is not. From there, we conduct research, write briefs to Parliament, and act as witnesses in support of legislation currently working its way through our parliamentary system. This is a prime example of how collaboration can influence policy change across all sectors and levels of government. Most importantly, this shows how collaboration can help prevent and eradicate human trafficking on a municipal, provincial, federal, and international scale.
My name is Holly Wood, and I'm representing Brave Education for Trafficking Prevention. I'm a Master of Legal Studies student at Carleton University, currently finishing my thesis focused on police responses to sex trafficking and sex work in Ontario. I hold a Bachelor of Arts Honours in Law from Carleton. I'm a nationally licensed human trafficking prevention educator with Brave Education, where I assist with building and delivering sexual exploitation prevention curriculums for grades K to 12 and adults. I serve as the Vice Chair of the Ottawa Coalition to End Human Trafficking and the Chair of the Advocacy Committee. I've worked for the Ontario Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services with foster care youth who are at risk of or actively being trafficked. I've worked at the Elizabeth Fry Society of Ottawa with women who were criminalized as a result of being trafficked. And I have worked in criminal defense, where the firm I worked for successfully defended a human trafficker. For my first example in support of Bill S224, I looked to the experience of a survivor who Brave has worked with. Out of respect, I will speak of this survivor anonymously. As a young 19-year-old girl, she was trafficked by a man whom she loved and whom she thought was her boyfriend. She had a relationship with her trafficker. He trafficked her in 5 cities across Canada. After years of being trafficked, she learned what trafficking was. She learned that she had, in fact, been trafficked. She pursued legal action against her trafficker. When asked to attend court to provide a victim impact statement, she got on the stand in the courtroom in front of her trafficker. She looked out in the courtroom and locked eyes with him. She immediately felt feelings of love and dependence flood her body. She ran out of the courtroom and did not testify because regardless of the fact that she knew she had been trafficked, she was so in love with him that seeing him in that courtroom triggered an emotional response of love, not fear. She was not afraid of her trafficker. She was in love with him. To this day, she tells us that she would go back to her trafficker in an instant because he made her feel more loved than her family and friends. She is a prime example of why this bill is so important, because even when victims of trafficking know they have been trafficked, the feelings of love and attraction to their traffickers do not disappear. Effects of the manipulation, coercion, love bombing, etc. do not end just because a survivor has been pulled out of their situation. Hence, it is important more now than ever to remove the requirement to prove fear so that survivors of human trafficking can pursue justice without the unfair burden of proving fear and without having to worry about the years of an emotional relationship with their trafficker getting in the way of securing a conviction for the crime they endured. Human trafficking and exploitation can affect anyone, not just women and girls. For my final example, I will look into my colleague, Ena Lucia Mariaca Pacheco's published research on male exploitation and familial trafficking. According to Ena Lucia's research, there can be several reasons why men or boys may be hesitant to show fear after being trafficked or exploited. Societal expectations in Canada place emphasis on men being strong and tough and suppressing their emotions. Therefore, many men and boys may feel pressure to not show that fear or weakness. They may believe that expressing fear or vulnerability is not productive or helpful, and may choose to internalize their emotions to maintain a sense of control or to try to forget about their trauma. Male victims may experience feelings of shame or embarrassment, judgment, or stigmatization if they show that they are fearful or unable to protect themselves from their male or female perpetrator. Therefore, by taking out fear and showing male victims that it is okay to finally speak out about their exploitation, hopefully we will see an increase in disclosures and convictions. It is important to approach this bill with empathy and understanding, recognizing that in any response to trauma, you are shaped by a complex interplay of personal, cultural, and societal factors. Fear can look like different things to different people, and in many cases is not what the current provision deems fear at all. I thank the committee, MP Colin Carey, and all other parliamentary bodies for paying long overdue attention to the devastating crime of human trafficking. Bill S224 is one of many steps we must take to protect our communities, and most importantly, those affected by the crime of trafficking. The fact of the matter is, our current laws in Canada are not evolving at the same pace as the crime of human trafficking. And in the anti-human trafficking movement, we have a common saying: it is a legal system, not a justice system. For myself and my team at Brave, Bill S224 can change the narrative for our legal system and can make justice more accessible for victims of human trafficking. Most importantly, Bill S224 will reinforce that the trafficking of individuals in Canada is not acceptable, will not be tolerated, and will be punished accordingly.
In closing, I want to express my deep gratitude to our esteemed guests, Nathan, Francesco, and Perry, for sharing their profound insights and experiences with us today. Their dedication on the prevention of human trafficking and healing of survivors and the development of programs for men and boys is truly commendable. As we begin our question and answer period, I encourage all of you to reflect on the critical importance of our collaborative efforts in the fight against human trafficking, exploitation, and child sexual abuse. The knowledge and expertise shared today here provides a solid foundation for us to build on as we work tirelessly and create a resilient community that will be immune to exploitation. So let us remember that this battle is ongoing and it requires a continuously collaborative and effort, research, and advocacy. Each one of us has an important role to play to ensure the safety and well-being of everyone in our community. I urge you to take the knowledge gained from today's webinar and turn it into action. Whether you work in research, advocacy, healthcare, or any other field, your contribution matters. Together, we can make meaningful impact that contributes to the world where human trafficking is eradicated and survivors are provided with the support and care they deserve. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much, Michelle. I would like to invite Nathan, Francesco, and Perry to join me for our panel discussion. Perfect. So our questions for today. So I will start with the first one. What are some trauma-informed, culturally sensitive approaches to engage diverse communities in conversation about human trafficking, child sexual abuse, violence, masculinity, healing, while acknowledging the unique social contexts? So let's begin with you, Perry.
Hey, so my thoughts on this is essentially doing what I already do, but at a grander scale, by different people or different types of abuse, different types of trauma, different types of societal backgrounds, because all of them will have their own unique perspective and their own lens of which they're seeing the world view. So I think about, everyone is addicted to storytelling, right? We remember stories because of how they make us feel included, right? And they inspired us to create change. So I think that if more survivors can share their stories through a story format, then that will inspire other people and give them permission to not necessarily put their story out there on social media and for the whole world to know, but to help them feel included and to not feel alone and to give them permission to share their story. And I feel like that at a grand scale covers a lot of parts in regards to societal backgrounds and giving people permission through their own lens.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Perry. Nathan, would you like to add anything to that?
Sure. I think for me, just speaking specifically to engaging with at-risk males in those marginalized communities, we have to practice cultural humility and be mindful of our own privilege. Trauma is subjective and it impacts people differently, and the adverse community environments that people live in can enhance or can pronounce that type of trauma. Cultural humility, I think we hear a lot about cultural competence and learning about the differences and how to engage. But I think that cultural humility is so important because it teaches us to really try to understand, be mindful that we might not have all of the answers. It allows us to better understand the experiences and how different cultures, cultural experiences, systemic racism, other barriers might make it even harder for people to disclose, but also that manifest those opportunities for exploitation. I also think it's important to really acknowledge the shame, the fear, and the stigma that's so often associated with having these conversations within some of the males within these marginalized populations. Francesco spoke to it really loudly in his presentation on creating a sense of safety and trust and what that means, and that can look differently for different populations. So I think the culmination of those really comes down to cultural humility and really active listening.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Nathan, for sharing those insights. And Francesco, is there anything that you would like to add?
Just very quickly, I think one clear information piece that came out of the series of case studies we conducted in different countries was that when our different organizations work with boys on these questions and with communities on these questions from marginalized communities or from communities that were different. We can think about migrant or refugees or displaced people or minorities in country. I think one big lesson learned that was common across countries was the fact of taking the time to understand that and using the right language. So every organization had to take a step back and understand and research on how do we talk about gender, how do we talk about gender roles and issues of masculinities in a community specifically. What is the language that we use, that boys use, but that communities themselves use as well, families, that is accepted. And we know that the construction of masculinity is so important it's such a big obstacle in the capacity to seek out help and look for help, that we need to understand what is the pressure that boys feel to comply with that role before being able to address this. So I think, for services or for organizations working on these questions, at least, I think it's very important to conduct at least, I don't want to use the word research, but at least some assessment of what are the cultural dynamics within the specific community, collaborating with that community before being able to even address the topic.
Thank you so much, Francesco. And I've definitely learned that through the research itself, interviewing different nationalities, different ethnic groups, and you can definitely see that there are very different barriers that come up depending on what ethnicity that you come from. And instead of just going forward and disclosing, some communities have that sense of bringing dishonor to the whole community or to the family, and that alone can stop them from disclosing. And it's very important to understand those sub barriers as well, just in those different communities, so we can create those safe spaces they don't just fit that one box, but really expand to anyone that really goes forward for help, or just to understand those that don't come forward to get help. Thank you very much. So let's go to our next question, and it's, what do you suggest to men and boys that are seeking help? Perry, would you like to start us off?
Sure. It's an interesting question because, as you can tell from my story, is that my dad never got that help, right? And so has many men out there not got that help. And obviously it's like the boys never got the help, and then they grow up and they become the men that still haven't got that help. And, my dad went to AA meetings, Alcoholics Anonymous, and but he stopped going to that. And I think a lot of times with men, I think that they, in one way, don't want to admit that they have a problem or admit that they've been through some type of abuse because of shame, right? Because of that act of vulnerability. But I think that the step before that because all men know that they need help. We all know that we need help. Whether we go out and get that was that's a completely different ballgame. But I feel like if we can approach men and approach boys, because if someone outside of our family would have approached my dad and been like, hey, me too, right? That would have been a whole different sort of ballgame for him, because now he doesn't feel alone anymore, right? So I feel like if we can get that, hey, me too, one man to another, one boy to another, one man to a boy, you know, and then I feel like then that there is the missing step before them then reaching out to help, right? Because now they're aware of the problem, they don't feel alone anymore. And they're like, okay, now I'm prepared to actually take that step and get some help. And I feel like that's a step that we need to do.
That's fantastic, Perry, and I definitely saw that in the research. Nathan, is there anything that you would like to add to what would you suggest to men and boys that are seeking help?
Sure. I mean, that was spot on, Perry. Thanks for sharing that. I think, this isn't your fault, right? To reinforce that, that you're not alone. So many men think that that there aren't any other men that they can disclose. But I think taking it a step further and helping to explain, what is the result of unaddressed trauma, right? Sometimes it manifests in substance dependency or alcoholism or acting out or other depression and PTSD. And I have so many young guys go through life thinking that they're broken. And so I think taking the time to kind of explain that this is how trauma, these things that have happened to you, this is how these things manifest, but that there's help, there's recovery available to you.
Thank you so much, Nathan. And Francesco, is there anything that you would like to add to that?
I'm not in a position to give any guidance to boys on how to disclose and how to look for help. I think rather what I would encourage us as a community and practitioners and service providers is to challenge our own gender biases that are so baked in the way we function. And, especially to those child protection services, to question ourselves on how do we see boys as potential survivors of sexual abuse and sexual exploitation, and to be able to be a supportive ear and to be someone who's in a position to believe what the boys are telling us, even if they're not telling it directly. And I think also what many practitioners have shared with me during the series of case studies was you don't need full disclosure to be able to support someone. So if we know that disclosure is not possible for whatsoever reason, mostly being shame or guilt or safety as well, we can still be able to support and provide support, emotional help at least. So my invitation is more to service providers rather than to boys.
No, thank you so much. And of course, we have to look at it that way as well to make sure that we're looking at the situation in a more holistic manner. And when I was doing my research, I was able to get 40 male survivors to tell me what was helpful to them and what wasn't helpful to them in the master's thesis. And it was very interesting because they actually made kind of like a progression chart of the very first thing was admitting that something had happened and really kind of going through that, their own self-research, starting to really ask those questions to themselves and looking for more information. And then that's when the next step, which Perry had mentioned, it was just find one person to open up to trust, to speak to, and then that can lead to community. And then that can lead to then actively getting help, going to someone that is trauma informed, that is specialized in the type of trauma that you need. And then furthermore, going after things that bring you joy again and bring you that happiness so that you can kind of start going into that thriving and not so much into just surviving. And so if anyone was interested in looking at that, Michelle has it in one of the handouts. It's the master's thesis, and that was created by survivors for survivors. But that leads me into the last question, which is, can you tell us about any toolkit items, books, programs, or initiatives that you would like to highlight? So let's start with you, Perry.
Sure. So we have the first one here, which is obviously my book, Breaking the Silence. And that's primarily because of part 3, which is essentially, which I covered already, is the whole notion of breaking the silence, right? But breaking the silence to yourself first in as many different ways as possible. So on step 17 or step 20, then when you're telling someone, is coming from a place of power, right? You're not seeking validation, not seeking approval, because you've already given that to yourself. So that's definitely the first thing, which is breaking the silence. You know, and I feel like this is so powerful, which is what we do, which I talked about, which is, you know, the books from survivors themselves, right? Where they've written these books, where they've been abused by their dad, trafficked by their dad, abused by their dad, abused by kids at school, you know, and that's what helps people through a story format know that they're not alone. And in this one here, I want a quick plug here. This is specifically, it's called Secret Shame, and it's specifically for male survivors. And he's a psychologist, and he basically just tons and tons of research into the differences between male and female, how they respond to it, and societal pressure plugged into all of that. And then the last thing is obviously about writing your writing a book or writing your story. Just a simple act of writing your story. You don't have to publish the book, but the simple act of writing your story, I think, is hugely powerful, because it enables you to take ownership over your story, which is something as survivors we never had.
And thank you so much, Perry, for highlighting that, and thank you for sharing the program that you've created to guide survivors through this storytelling narrative, either, as you said, just for themselves, or if they wanted to share with the world, they have that chance too. And thank you so much for the massive change you're making in so many people's lives around the world. And so that leads me to Nathan. Would you like to share with us anything that you're doing, any books, programs, initiatives that are coming up?
Sure. Just one final quick plug for the conference on violence against boys and men. I've shared on that previously, and the attendees have information on that. It's June 11th through 13th here in Miami. Global in scope, and we're always looking for global partners on the planning, delivery, attendees. So I encourage everyone to check out the website for that. But in particular, I uploaded 2 handouts to the folder here that everyone has access to. The first is an issue brief that I co-authored with National Youth Law. This was Understanding Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Boys and Men. It was a collaboration based on several focus groups with males with lived experience. And we break down risk, vulnerability, but most importantly, service recommendations. So recommendations how to engage in males with lived experience. The other is a handout that was developed by the National Human Trafficking Training and Technical Assistance Center on enhancing services for males experiencing trafficking. Really powerful finding on using motivational interviewing and universal education. They found to be really successful or really effective in engaging with males. And then the other is a listening session from a series or a report of listening sessions that the same organization conducted with males, really asking males, what are risk and vulnerability? How do we engage? And so I'll put the link to that, to the latter one in the chat.
Thank you for sharing, Nathan. And Francesco, is there anything that the Global Boys Initiative or ECPAT are doing that are coming up in the future?
Well, I mean, on our website, you have the research, the case studies, and the reports as well of the Global Boys Summit, which we showed a video of. And in the future, we're going to focus mostly on collaboration and bringing forward the action points of the Global Boys Summit. So I look forward to connect it and with anyone who's interested and wants to work on this.
And thank you so much, Francesco, for that. And it is actually quite incredible that you were able to bring together so many practitioners from around the world. And it was amazing to see that those documents have just come out a couple of days ago of the findings from those. And you can find those as well in the handout, everyone. So thank you, everyone, so much for being here and for participating in this panel discussion. So I will leave it to Michel to close us off. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, it was a very rich, dense, and highly informative, meaningful, powerful webinar, and attended by participants from 21 countries: Austria, Burkina Faso, Canada, Côte d'Ivoire, Eswatini, Germany, Ghana, Ireland, Italy, Kenya, Malawi, Mali, Morocco, Nepal, Netherlands, Nigeria, South Sudan, Spain, Switzerland, UK, US, and Zambia. Thank you very much to all of you for being here with us tonight. And I would first like to thank again Ena Lucia Mariaca Pacheco, Francesco Checon, Perry Power, Nathan Earl, as well as Holly Wood, and announce our next webinar in the series of webinars organized with Ena Pacheco on this very important subject of male survivors. And this webinar shall take place on Tuesday, the 5th of December. And it will be entitled Challenges and Best Practices in Human Trafficking Policy, Legislation, Investigation, and Victim Support Services for Male Victims. So looking forward for this. And in the meantime, next week, on Wednesday, the 20th of September, the Order of Malta organizes with the International Organization for Migration a side event at the United Nations in Geneva, raising awareness on contemporary slavery from 3 to 4 p.m. and with the following speakers, Ambassador Cindy Dyer. She is Ambassador at Large of the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking Persons at the Department of State, and Professor Tomoya Obokata, Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Slavery to the Human Rights Council. Then we have Dr. Berta Fernandez Alfaro, IOM Chief of Mission, and Mrs. Alex Eckstein, Project Director from the FAST Initiative. You are all welcome to participate in person or online, and please find the link WebEx in the handouts, also on our website at loudoftthesea.org. And indeed, now, in concluding this webinar, I would like to express my gratitude to Yves Reichenbach and Emanuele Piluso for their contributions. In a few days, you shall find a video recording of this webinar and of the 30 webinars we organized since October 2020, with subtitles in 7 languages on our websites, as well as on Vimeo and YouTube. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for supporting our efforts, as well as helping survivors. We hope to see you at our next webinars. And Ena and Francesco, Nathan, Perry, thanks a million. You've been outstanding speakers, and go on with your action because it's well worth remembering. And as you know, this webinar will be broadcasted participants online tonight. So all the best to all of you. Thank you, and hope to see you again in Geneva or in other places. Thank you.